I guess the microphone is on. All right, well, thank you for coming. Policy might be a little bit of a misnomer because I think a policy is a subset of what I think is a little bit broader topic. That is, how do you play nice in the sandbox, basically? How do you become a good or stay a good open source citizen? So before I sort of jump in, I have a couple of questions. Students who just a little, okay. My daughter's a freshman here, by the way, at USC, so that's why when the opportunity came up, I was like, oh, I'll go to Columbia. Got to have dinner with her last night, which was great. Government. Business, corporate. Okay. Everybody who raised their hand, not the students probably, but you're here because you're thinking about using it, are using it, not really sure, want to keep it, want to find a way to bring it in, want to find a way to keep it out. Well, probably don't want to find a way to keep it out, you probably wouldn't be here. Okay. Yeah.
So we definitely need to get something that's consistent across the agencies. Each agency kind of has its own thing right now.
Okay. All right. So that's a good setup for. So it's interesting. Our company, we were funded in 2005. So we've been doing this piece for about 6 years. Our largest customer is a large automobile manufacturer in Detroit, Michigan. Just released an electric car, but I can't tell you what their name is. So you can figure that one out. For years, their stated policy on open source by their CIO is we don't have it and we don't allow it. They have been our single largest customer for 6 years, and we supply them 256 pieces of open source on a very regular basis with a lot of other help. So you're not alone in terms of the policy. People have been able to sort of go, okay, what do we do? Because the reality is the reason policy is becoming important or becoming a good citizen is because you really, if you think you can keep it out, you can't. It's there. It's pretty much everywhere in the organization. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. The first part, I'm going to try to convince you that you really should have a policy if you don't. This is my FUD part of the talk, so I'll just apologize for that up front. And basically try to illustrate for you why you might want to be concerned, and then we'll talk about what are the elements of a policy. The first part I won't spend a lot of time on. Just quickly for those of you who don't know the company, the mission of our company is to help businesses successfully and safely deploy open source software. And we have a bunch of tools to help do that. We do policy workshops as the starting point for a lot of customers because they're in the same boat as you, like, geez, how do we get started with a policy? And then we have a bunch of tools to help you actually make your policy work. Because without tools, enforcing a policy is kind of difficult. So we have about 200 enterprise customers today, and we've been in business about 6 years. All right, so do you need a policy? This was the first evidence that I could find talking about why you might need a policy. This is a letter from the FFIEC. This is one of the regulatory agencies for the banking institutions in the United States. And in October of 2004, they issued a letter talking about the risk management of free and open source software. And the key point that I wanted to share with you in here is that they said the use of FOSS, free and open source, is increasing in the mainstream business world and financial services. They believe that the use of FOSS does not pose risks that are fundamentally different from risks presented by the use of proprietary self-developed software. However, the acquisition and use of FOSS necessitates implementation of unique risk management practices. So there's no worse or less or more risk than other software. It's just software. But there's different risk, I think, is sort of the way that I would look at that. So this letter actually drove more than one of our customers to begin to craft policies. The first policy I saw from a customer was late 2005, early 2006, and it was driven by this. Today, and this was actually the research that Bob, can't thank him enough for that little plug, but we did do some research, and we found open source in 88% of Android apps, 41% of Apple apps. So from getting a letter saying it's it's kind of reaching into all of the places to mobile is not that's not very long. That's 5 years ago, right? So 6 years ago. So the real question is, what does that mean to you? Okay, so big deal. All right, so a couple of other things that you'll see happening. This is not just a theoretical risk. When I was on the road like 4 or 5 years ago, people would say, okay, great, so what? Well, so what since then is, you heard it this morning probably more than once, there's going to be more legal action. There has been a lot of legal action. Cisco is, someone called them the poster child for the FSL GPL lawsuit. This went on literally for 5 years when Cisco, let's just say, refused to change their practices. All right, that has changed. This lawsuit here, Best Buy, Samsung, 17 other defendants named in one lawsuit, all about license compliance. And they're starting to win these suits, right? So the key point for you to take away here is that if you don't have a policy, none of the licenses are necessarily bad, but if you don't have a policy, this kind of thing could happen. Legal action could happen. I think a much more important risk than the legal action is the bad PR. I mean, you start to get headlines, most Android tablets fail at compliance. We've had customers have to pull things off the shelf at Best Buy, literally out of boxes, because they're failing at compliance. And we're finding it's compliance. What's the number one compliance concern? You heard them talk about it, it's license concern. So it's policy. Your policy, as you think about your policy, really does need to focus on the license. Not the only thing, but it's one of the most important things you need to call out in your policy. And I'm going to sort of give you a checklist of what that should look like. Here's another thing to consider in this research that we published. In the month of February alone, 206 apps were pulled. 206 Android apps were literally taken down and pulled off the store. So if you're developing an application, if you want to, not saying that maybe you'll have a mobile app, but people are watching. People are paying very close attention to what's going on in the apps, and they're trying to make sure that people stay in compliance with those apps. I'm not going to go through the detail of why they're pulling them down. So just to give you a little background, what we did in some of that space, Bob talked about it, we scanned 600 applications. We literally went through the top categories of paid and free. And of the apps that we found, we looked for the key compliance. Anybody know what the key compliance to the GPL is? There's really two things. So maybe that's the first place that we'll start. All right, so if you are using the most popular license, which is GPL and LGPL, right there is the number one thing you have to do. So your policy needs to talk about how you're going to do this. You have to provide the code and provide a copy of the license. And Apache, which is also popular, and you heard Worley talk about the fact that maybe he thinks it's better, same thing, provide a copy of the license, but then you have to provide an attribution. I mean, all they're asking you to do is give credit where credit is due. That's all they're asking you to do. So you can boil a lot of the legal stuff down. Your policy needs to focus really on those 4 boxes. And what we found, 71% of the apps don't do that. I mean, it's not hard, right? I mean, how hard can it be to give a copy of the license and provide the source code or make some attributions? 71% of the people don't do it. And it's not because it's hard to do, it's because they don't understand, what's required. So for you guys, okay, you're going, all right, or do I really care? So I would venture to say that in the open source community, there really are 3 reasons I would suggest that you do care, right? One, I mean, hey, it's free software, you're getting it for free. I mean, it is the right thing to do. I've never met anybody who goes, we do not want to comply with that terms of that license. We'd like to violate that. I've never heard that from anybody. The other thing is that it's your IP that's at risk. So, if you don't concerned about what happens to your own IP, then really don't care. But if you are, and you should be, then pay a little bit of attention. It's not that hard. And 3, it costs you some money, right? So, yes, we definitely want to comply. And the big impact on your licensing or on your IP is copyleft. When I say copyleft, Bob talked about it. Does that anybody know? Okay, so all right, so hold that thought. All right, and I'll talk about an easy way to think about that. Right, so copyrights are a problem with copyleft. The other problem with a copyleft license is if you're using a license of that type and you're including your code with that, so you're sort of creating this derivative work. It's sort of a legal term, but if you're using some open source and some of yours and putting it together, depending on the technical way you put it together, it can mean that you're obligated to do certain things, and your policy needs to talk about those. So with protecting your IP, with non-compliance costing you money, lawsuits, you know, I'm trying to make the point to you that you should do something about it. And the best way to mitigate some of these, there is real unique risk, but you should do something about it. So here's what I think you should do. In terms of becoming a good citizen, the very first thing I think you can do is understand the licensing. So when I said copyleft, if you don't know what that means, you know, invest a little bit of time and energy sorting out what it does mean. Have a policy that takes that into account. It's not that difficult if you understand the business needs of your organization. Track what you are doing. Well, and this should be something in your policy. Try to find out where you're using this stuff. And this sounds very simple, right? I mean, where are you using open source? Here's a conversation that typically happens with me. Talk to this CEO or a business person. I go, boy, we really don't know what's going on with open source. Well, we could help you do that. Oh, go talk to the technical guy. So I go talk to the technical guy. I get the CTO or somebody, and they go, oh, we got that covered. We know exactly what we're doing.